Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, responding to the fiscal year 2019 solicitation for the Community-Based Adult Reentry Program. My name is Jan De La Cruz, and I'm a policy analyst at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, or CSG Justice Center. Before we officially begin, I have a few technical items to note. If you encounter any audio or connection problems during the webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. We'll also put that number on the chat box on your screen. We will be recording today's webinar and posting it on our website, along with a copy of the presentation slides. So if you happen to miss anything due to any technical issues, you'll be able to reference this in a later time. We'll also have a Q&A portion in this webinar, and we encourage you to submit your questions about the content in the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen throughout the course of the presentation. We'll address as many questions as possible before we conclude today. Joining me for today's webinar is Andre Bethea, Policy Advisor at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, and my colleague Janet Lane, Senior Policy Analyst here at CSG's Justice Center. After a little bit more information on who we are, we will provide a brief overview on the Second Chance Act Community Reentry Grant, discuss the keys to a successful application, and provide you with some additional information to make sure you are well equipped for the application process. But first, I'd like to turn it over to Andre to tell you a little bit more about the Bureau of Justice Assistance.
Hi, Jan. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Andre Bethea. I'm the Policy Advisor here at the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, where our mission is to provide leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support local, state, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. Please check us out at www.bja.gov. We're excited to partner with our colleagues over at the National Reentry Resource Center at the Council of State Governments Justice Center.
Thank you, Andre. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the Council of State Governments Justice Center. CSG Justice Center is a national nonprofit organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels from all branches of government. Our staff provides practical, nonpartisan advice and develop research-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. Now I'll talk a little bit about the Second Chance Act. The Second Chance Act, or SCA, authorizes a variety of federal grant programs that support state and local governments, tribal entities, and nonprofit organizations in providing evidence-based services intended to reduce recidivism. Recently reauthorized in December, the Second Chance Act has supported over $400 million in reentry investments across the country since its inception. In many ways, one of the major cornerstones of the Second Chance Act is providing technical assistance through the National Reentry Resource Center, or NRC, which is administered by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and managed by the CSG Justice Center. The NRC provides support to grantees across various SCA grant programs, such as the Community Reentry Grant Program. The Resource Center is continually adding new content and resources to its website. You can also sign up for newsletters, stay up to date with the latest reentry news, and explore interactive content and databases. Again, be sure to visit the website, as it can be an invaluable tool not just as a potential SCA grantee, but also as a reentry professional doing this work. Now we'll move into the specifics of the SCA Community Reentry Grant and start with a brief overview of the grant program. Typically, the The Second Chance Act grant programs are geared towards government agencies such as Department of Corrections, sheriff's offices, states, and various other government entities. But the SCA Community Reentry Program is special in that it's specifically awarded to community-based and faith-based nonprofit organizations. The Department of Justice has awarded over $120 million in grant funding to such organizations. You'll be joining an alumni group of over 230 grantees across 47 states and the District of Columbia. This year, the grant is open to two categories. Category 1, titled Community-Based Adult Reentry, and Category 2, for Community-Based Adult Reentry with small or rural organizations. To be eligible for Category 2, your organization must have an annual operating budget of less than $1 million. Please note, this is a 48-month grant program, and it begins October 1st of this year. Application deadline is June 1st. Here's some more details on the different categories. Category 1 grants will be for $1 million, $200,000 of that million released for the planning phase of your grant, and the remaining $800,000 released once you have moved on to the implementation phase of the program. Category 1 grant recipients must serve at least 150 individuals in the course of the grant period. Category 2 grants are $500,000 in total, with $100,000 released during the planning phase and the remaining $400,000 for implementation. Category 2 grantees must serve a minimum of 75 individuals. More on the planning phase a little bit later on. For this grant program, applicants are asked to implement or expand reentry programs that demonstrate strong partnerships with corrections, probation and parole, law enforcement, and other reentry service providers. The increased partnership engagement for this grant is key. Case management plans should address criminogenic risk and needs and include service delivery or facilitation. More on the criminogenic risk and needs later. Again, to be eligible for this grant, you must be a tribal, community, or faith-based nonprofit organization. And also to note is that federally recognized Indian tribal governments, as determined by the Secretary of the Interior, are eligible as well. I mentioned earlier a planning phase in this program. The planning phase typically lasts up to 12 months. During this time, you'll have access to a portion of your grant funds, as I mentioned earlier, $200,000 and $100,000 for Category 1 and 2 respectively. During this group planning period, a planning and implementation guide, or P&I guide, must be completed in consultation with your NRC technical assistance provider. Here's an overview of the weighted sections of your proposals in your application. Please refer to the solicitation for the full details for your proposal and application requirements. And now for keys to a successful application, I'll turn it over to Andre to start us off on some of the mandatory requirements of the grant.
Thanks, Jan. Again, we want to express to everyone who is interested in applying for this particular grant, what are the mandatory requirements? An applicant should have an MOU or MOA, Memorandum of Understanding, with a correctional partner. The applicant must be willing to serve medium to high-risk adults as determined by a criminogenic needs assessment. The applicant should have an established relationship with an independent evaluator. We'll unpack that as we go further in this discussion. The applicant should also be ready to develop a plan for measuring and reporting outcomes. See page 7 of the solicitation for many of the other requirements. Priority considerations. The utilization of a randomized controlled trial, or an RCT. You must be willing to evaluate the effectiveness of your program and practices with an RCT for you to be selected under this priority consideration. In addition, among the other priority considerations, you must be willing to serve moderate high or high risk offenders. Applicants that propose strategies to reduce violent recidivism among high risk offenders under supervision who have a history of serious violence and are identified in concert with local and or state law enforcement. Another top priority consideration is OJP will, as appropriate, give priority consideration and award decisions to applications that propose projects that directly benefit federally designated qualified opportunity zones. See page 9 of the solicitation for more priority considerations. As we drift into the examples of the program components, we want to point out gender-responsive, trauma-informed, and culturally based programming, pre- and or post-release mentoring, veteran-specific programming, cognitive behavioral interventions, job readiness and employability services, substance addiction treatment, housing support and homelessness prevention, medical and mental health care services, as well as family supportive programming.
There are many facets to successful reentry. For your program to be progressive and comprehensive, the examples that Andre just read are components that we have seen in the past. Some programs have identified veterans, for example, as a focus to their program. If you have a focus on family supportive programming, then you might consider mediation or conflict resolution to augment. As you are working to complete your application, I want to draw your attention to a very helpful webinar series that BJA has compiled to assist those applying for BJA funds, which cover the BJA Grant Educational Series, the importance of using the application checklist, how applications are successfully submitted, how sub-awards can be incorporated into an application, and how to attach documents. You will hear Andre Bethea, whom you've just heard from today, providing answers to frequently asked questions and providing helpful tips. Additional webinars that we invite you to check out are Winning Grants, Your Writing Your Way to Success, and Implementation and Organizational Capacity. These can be found on the National Reentry Resource Center as the Council of State Governments website. A section of the publication, Mentoring as a Component of Reentry, is dedicated to a questionnaire that can serve as a relationship building block with corrections. The link will be on the next slide and will indicate to you how to access that link. Mentoring, as co-authored by my esteemed colleague Jan de la Cruz, has played a major part in this grant program throughout the years of our many proposed programs, and will include and continue to incorporate. We will always include and continue to incorporate some form of mentoring. So please refer to the Mentoring as a Component of Reentry, Practical Considerations from the Field. And now I'm turning my webinar here back over to Jan. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Next, I'll go over a few more items of additional information to help you navigate the application process. Financial information. Please make sure to read DOJ Grant's financial guide and visit the financial management training at the links on this slide. The financial guide will be crucial to successfully navigating through this application process. Please note the application links as well. All applicants must register at the grants.gov link above. And again, all applications are due June 11th. Here we have some important contact information that you can refer back to when we make the slides available after the webinar. Please make sure you use these links and these phone numbers to your advantage when navigating the application process. And finally, please do read the solicitation in full. Here's a link again to the full solicitation. So now we'll move over to the Q&A portion of the webinar and take some questions from everyone. Please remember to enter your question in the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. All right, first question coming in, we have, did you say an RCT is required? And no, I do not believe we said an RCT is required. Andre, would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. No, we did not say it was required. We did not mention that an RCT was a part of mandatory requirements. We said it was a priority consideration. So if you want to be selected within the pool of priority considerations, then you should consider a RCT as you discuss things with your independent evaluator.
Thank you, Andre. I have another question here. Were there any difference in the rules between grantees and a subawardee's evaluator contractor in the use of funds? More specifically, is there any way to use grant funds paid to an evaluation firm to provide an incentive to participants for data collection? Did you get that, Andre?
I did, and the answer is absolutely not. Participants should not be paid to be a part of the RCT if you are proposing an RCT for an evaluation. Participants are not to be paid for any evaluation activity.
Thank you. Another question here is, what if the correctional partners I currently work with don't use a validated assessment tool? Is there funding available for them to begin doing that within the grant itself?
Yes, you can actually pay for training, pay for training on a risk and needs assessment, the introduction training as well. However, it will require you to make sure that all of the pertinent staff members, those working on the programmatic area as well as those doing security, and itemize the time. Within all this should be established in the MOU of who's going to do what and when and where for the participants, whether pre-release, post-release, and at what specific times of the intervention and work through with the participants, especially the case management.
Great, thank you, Andre. I have a question about unallowable use of funds. While it seems straightforward in the RFP, I want to be 100% clear. And then they ask, I'm sorry, that question, whoever asked that question, the second half of that question is cut off. I apologize for that. I'll go back to. Please repeat entities that are eligible to apply. Are county government agencies eligible? And again, the grant is, to be eligible for this grant, you have to be a community-based or faith-based nonprofit organization or a tribal nonprofit organization or entity. It is not open to county government agencies. Okay. Question here. I have a question here. If we have a signed, executed contract from the prison where we perform our services, as well as a letter of support from the facility, do we still need a separate MOU?
Yes, absolutely. You're supposed to have an MOU that speaks specifically to this particular initiative. It should be mentioned and named in the initiative in the MOU.
Okay, thank you, Andre. I have another one here. Is there a target for geographically distributing the awards around the country? Also, will grants be prioritized to high crime urban areas?
In my discussion throughout this particular webinar, we never mentioned anything about high crime areas, nor did we say anything about funding being distributed. We pointed out priority considerations that included an RCT, using a randomized controlled trial. We talked about qualified opportunity zones. That was actually mentioned, and then we discussed serving moderate high risk as identified in a criminogenic risk assessment tool individuals.
Thank you, Andre. Is there a minimum amount of time that the 150 program participants must be in the program? For instance, do they require 24 months minimum program participation and 12 months evaluation? Andre, if I can take this one, I don't believe that is the case. You do have to serve a minimum of 150 program participants. As for program participation and evaluation, that really depends on the design of the program and the design of your delivery of services and your evaluation component and how that's structured. Moving on to the next one. If we have already begun expansion to a larger program and facility, can we still apply?
Sure, you can apply. You can always apply for funding. We would never preclude anyone from applying except those who are not considered eligible as determined by the solicitation.
Thank you, Andre. So we have another one here. Can the evaluation of program participants take place while they are still in the program, or must they exit the program after 12 months and then have a 12-month? So this is very similar to the previous question. So again, there is no minimum requirement. It really just depends on the program design and the way your evaluation is designed. Should a small organization apply for Category B that is not in a rural area? Andre, I don't know if you may want to elaborate a little bit more on the eligibility for each category.
Category 2 is designed for either you're a small organization or you're an organization that operates in a rural area. Category 2 is only asking you to serve 75 persons, and you can ask or request up to an amount of $500,000. Keep in mind, also with Category 2, we're looking at your budget, and you shouldn't have a budget that extends further than $1 million.
Thank you, Andre. Another question here. If we don't spend the $200,000 for planning phase, does the balance go into the program? And Andre, correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, if you should be sure to adequately plan out your program during the planning phase and use your allotted funds accordingly to your budget. But yes, whatever does not get used up in the planning phase will go into the budget to the remaining funds for the implementation phase. Another one here, Category 1 and 2 question. In regards to the Category 1 and Category 2, as long as one can service the minimum 150, do they have to go with Category 2 even if they are a rural entity?
This is not where we make the selection for you. The RFP has been written. You are to govern yourselves accordingly based on your organization, your capacity, and your ability to meet the mandate.
I have a request here to show the priority considerations again. Again, that is in the solicitation, and they start on page 9. Okay. Sorry, just navigating some of the questions here. We have one here. Can we include a prototype of the program as part of the 12-month planning period? Andre, I'm sure you can tackle that question. I think it would probably depend on what they mean by prototype now.
Exactly. A prototype is very relative. Again, we need questions that we can actually answer. This is not the opportunity for you to get around reading the solicitation. You have a full solicitation that provides you with all the guidance that you need. The questions for now for the Q&A should be geared towards what exactly we can actually assist on. A prototype is not something that I can define, nor can you at this point. So we want to be helpful. However, we also want to be mindful that there's no way to circumvent what has already been established in the solicitation.
Great. Thank you, Andre. Another question here seems to be geared towards sub-awardees. To what extent can applicants propose teaming with for-profit organizations or other nonprofit organizations? Is there a minimum % of work required to be done by employees of prime contractor?
We have a financial planning guide. Please draw your attention to it. There is a link in the solicitation that links right to the financial guide. You will cover all the mandates that are necessary regarding your sub-awards and subcontractors.
Thank you, Andre. I have another one. We are a small organization that currently works with reentry clients. Is there a certain size that an organization and size of the city or area served? Again, if I understand the question correctly, I think the size is not what qualifies you for the category. Again, I think it depends on your annual operating budget. Andre, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Nothing further. Thank you, Jan.
You're welcome. I have an eligibility question. Would local workforce boards be eligible for this if they were a 501c3 organization?
If the solicitation identifies who is eligible, how you termed yourself versus what do you look like on paper as an organization, govern yourselves accordingly. It is open to nonprofit and faith-based institutions who are 501c3s, in addition to tribal nonprofits as well as tribal governments.
Thank you, Andre. Is the Category 1 grant over 48 months funded at $1 million for the total grant period? Again, that is, the grant is 48 months overall, but it is split within roughly at least 12-month planning period. For Category 1, that would mean you have access to $200,000 of those grant funds for the first 12 months, leaving you 36 months of implementation programming remaining, where you'll have access to the remaining $800,000 of those funds. Andre, anything else to add to that?
No.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, we have, somebody said, did you say $6 million? No, we did not say $6 million. Just to clarify that. I have a question for indirect cost. Can we charge indirect for the entire budget or just, sorry, I lost this here, or just admin cost?
Only admin costs.
Thank you. Okay. Grab. So another question here is, which I'm getting a lot of multiples here, is what qualifies as a violent offender?
This would be identified by your criminogenic risk assessment tool in terms of moderate, high, and that differs from state to state based on the assessments that they use, based on the laws, based on the law enforcement partners that you would have, as well as the correctional partners. It is not something that the nonprofit would just arrive at capriciously. It requires an in-depth collaboration with your law enforcement and correctional partners to make that determination.
Thank you, Andre. I have a question here regarding participant eligibility, which I just lost here. I apologize for that. So the question basically is asking if are participants eligible who are no longer incarcerated in a facility at time of enrollment?
Yes, that is permissible, but that does not preclude you from the mandate that you still have to have an MOU, MOA with an established correctional partner. There still has to be a pipeline for receiving clientele.
Thank you, Andre. Is mentoring a requirement for this grant if you have life coaching for each participant? Mentoring is not a requirement for this grant. It was highlighted before as an example of a component that past programs have had as part of their program design. How many applicants does this program typically receive?
At this point, this is the most competitive Second Chance Act grant. To that end, we also made and have increased the amount of awards that has been distributed or awarded to particular grantees. We encourage everyone to apply and to not be dissuaded by the number of applications received.
Thank you, Andre. I have a qualified opportunity zone question. How do we find out? How do we find the qualified opportunity zone in our area? Again, the details for that are on the solicitation on page 10. So please refer to that. It's specifically on top of the page on page 10 of the solicitation.
Hi, Jan. I just want to tell everyone that although we avail ourselves to do a webinar, the National Reentry Resource Center, as well as the Bureau of Justice Assistance, is willing to be there for you in terms of your questions. However, it does not circumvent reading the entire RFP and its required attachments. We do encourage everyone to please read the solicitation. It is very important, and it has all of the details that you need should you and your organization decide to apply for this grant funding.
Thank you, Andre. I have one more question here. What is considered a small organization for Category 2? Is it just the budget, or are there other factors that go into considering eligibility for Category 2?
It's typically the budget that makes the determination and the location of your particular organization or where you're willing to work. So that's why it's small nonprofits and or rural organizations that are going to work in rural communities.
Thank you, Andre. At this point, I think we're getting a lot of repeated questions. Not many new ones are coming in right now. So at this point, I think is a good moment to end the webinar. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any one of us, and please refer back to the webinar, the presentation slides, or those contact information and those links and phone numbers that were shared with you early on. A recording of this webinar will be made available shortly, and so will the presentation slides be available as well. This concludes our webinar, and thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Andre, for participating.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye.